This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I'm here today with Jesse Arm, and we are here to talk about some surveys and focus groups of Republicans with a focus on young Republicans, I guess. And actually, before I start, we're going to be focusing on Gen Z. Can you talk about what the dates are, how Americans kind of think about Gen Z, Zoomers, who they are and why they're important, I guess?
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Razib, for having me. It's cool. It's always cool to someone who you've been following on Twitter and on all kinds of platforms for a long time to see them in real life and be able to chat with them. What do people generally think of Gen Z? Well, we hear a lot about economic anxiety, a feeling of sort of precarity, a feeling of deep unfairness that what is owed to them will not be delivered, that they are being sort of set up for failure. More sociologically or behaviorally, we hear about Gen Z as a group that is on the one hand entrepreneurial and adventurous. They are the first creator generation that feels incredibly comfortable recording themselves and talking on camera, not just those that are super famous, but those who just want to communicate to their friends, broadcast publicly as only, movie stars or celebrities from a generation prior would. But what we did with the Manhattan Institute, where I'm the vice president of external affairs and do a lot of public opinion work, what I found out when we went down to Nashville and collected a group of 18 to 29-year-old Republicans and conservatives, Trump voters, highly religious group, spoke to about 20 of them. Some of them were students, college educated. Others were not, had never attended college, worked blue-collar jobs. So a real mix of Gen Z Republicans of all types. I kind of sensed something a little bit different. I didn't sense a group that was deeply rattled by economic tensions and anxiety. You would hear them echo talking points from the media about how they're frustrated that they can't buy a home or whatever. But when you dug a little bit deeper, you found that this was a group of deeply religious and conservative people up to their late 20s, nearly 30 years old, and very, very few of them were married. Very, very few of them even had a serious long-term romantic partner. And I don't think that would have been true of previous generations of young red state conservatives who were deeply Christian. So I think that might be part of the reason that when we asked them about home buying and whether if the funds were really made available to them today, not a lot of them actually said, yeah, I'd definitely buy a home. They said things like, my job might ship me around, or I'm going to work a job in another city, or I'm going to grad school in another place, or I'm waiting to settle down, or I want to be in the city near Nashville right now, but I want to be out in the country later on. So in short, you kind of heard a lot of just feelings of wanting to retain their own optionality that didn't sound that different than the sort of rootless, downwardly mobile progressive types that all mobilized and voted for Zohran Mamdani in New York City.
I mean, it sounds like, we have a birth dearth, fertility collapse in this country, not as bad as in some countries, and, it is interesting to me when I was younger, I knew a lot of Mormon families. I grew up in Eastern Oregon. I knew a lot of Mormon families where they were like, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children, like not unknown. And now I look at like the Mormon Latter-day Saint fertility is like 2.7 or something like that. It's low. It's like below 3, It's still above replacement, but still, even they have been hit. And so, and, obviously they're stereotypically a very fecund group. And so even they've been hit. So I'm not like surprised that, your focus group people, are, just typical young, Americans, it's just affected by the whole, like, general social, I don't want to say malaise because that has certain connotations, but I feel like there is, maybe like we're in a low trust, kind of a low hope moment in our culture. And I think that's, found among the youth in general. Like, what do you think about that? What was your take when you were talking to them?
I found that this was a group of people who were animated less by confounding, all-consuming rage about any one issue, economic, foreign policy, or otherwise, and more that they were just sort of looking to politics for a good time. They wanted it to be an extension of what fed their TikTok and Reels feeds,
I
YouTube,
got it.
whatever. They were looking for entertainers. That's why they like Donald Trump. I think it's why a number of them like Tucker Carlson. It was not uncommon for people in our group to say nice things about Tucker Carlson, but also hold, really traditional views about free market economics or hold a non-negative view about the modern state of Israel. The real through line for a lot of these people was just sort of a desire to see a politics that is fun and entertaining.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's just true. It's like reality TV in a way. Politics is now reality TV, I think. Which I don't even know if a lot of Zoomers know really if that reality TV is a category in and of itself. It's been around their whole life basically, so they probably don't remember before. It's just part of TV, right? And then with social media, they become reality TV. You become reality TV with Instagram, with like Reels and with the TikToks and stuff like that. Everyone's a creator, right? Everyone's a potential creator, a little bit, creator and a consumer. It's a very interesting feedback, right?
Well, one thing that a really sharp political observer recently said to me is that what Donald Trump was able to do in 2015 when he kind of came into his own politically was not something that a Hollywood movie star would have been able to accomplish. There is something about the TV sensation. There's an intimacy to it. These people see them in their rooms every single night. So when I think a little bit about 2028, and now we have a significant chunk of polling data that tells us that Democrats who were at one point obsessed with the preservation of norms and didn't want a Trump of their own, a fighter who would kind of break the rules. Now we have some suggestions that may have flipped and that Democrats do have an appetite for that in 2028. I almost wonder if it could be another outsider from the realm of television, but I don't think it's going to be a movie star like George Clooney with a chateau in France where he's spending the majority of time. I think it could be somebody like Mark Cuban, who who appeals to millennials through Shark Tank in a similar way that Trump appealed to a couple of generations prior on The Apprentice, or Jon Stewart, who is an iconic, semi-comedic, semi-serious. Like, do you take Jon Stewart seriously? Well, you kind of got your news from him for a generation. But if things ever got too hot, he'd throw up his hands and say, well, I'm just a comedian. You can't look at me that honestly. So now that we've got a massive group of creators, so to speak, people who are ever present, I don't know that Gen Z even watches TV. Gen Z can't watch anything that's more than a few minutes long because their attention spans are completely fried by short vertical video content that comes to them first as the served up model. So we'll see. I don't know what kinds of politicians are going to come out of the creator first, social media first universe.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like some politicians are trying to feed into that. They're pivoting. So I think I'm thinking Gavin Newsom's social media, very, very, you know, blue Trumpy in a way. I think it's like, just the vibe is, they're trying to be kind of, a bit offensive, edgy, pushing the envelope, but like now for like blue tribe instead of red tribe.
Yeah. Newsom is super interesting right now. It's almost like a love child of Obama and Trump phenomenon, in the sense that he's got this social media presence that's incredibly aggressive. He's willing to take legislative actions that are norm defying, and he'll tell you so, basically, with this gerrymandering stuff via a ballot measure. But he says it's all warranted on the basis of what the president is doing in Washington. But then there is the Obama side, right? Which is like something that Trump doesn't really possess. But Gavin Newsom can go on Ezra Klein's show, or hell, have on his own podcast, play host to Steve Bannon or Charlie Kirk, and play the kind of calm, cool, and collected mediator who's able to sort of see the common ground with his fellow American, even if they feel a world away on policy. Gavin is the kind of guy who can identify some area on which they connect. That's a unique skill set. And I think that Newsom is in some ways a more sophisticated operator because he recognizes the reality that, sure, the whole country may not be online, and online may not be real life. But if you watch the news, like the institutional corporate cable news, they're just talking about what Twitter was talking about an hour, 2 hour, 3 hours earlier. And that's a very real phenomenon. So elites pay a lot of attention to what happens in these weird corners of the internet. And despite the fact that these weird corners of the internet can kind of be manipulated by small minority actors, sometimes coming from far outside the mainstream American right, and often coming from far outside of America altogether, Newsom at least has a sensitivity to that new reality.
So I mean, I guess you're talking about like far outside the mainstream. Talk about Nick Fuentes. Talk about what they think about him. They know about him. I think one of the focus groups, one of the guys was a big fan, but was like half of them knew who he was. Like I watched like Brett Cooper, who's like a Zoomer, center right, or maybe just a conservative right wing. And she just said, people in her generation, she's a Zoomer, younger Zoomer, they watch because it's funny, and I don't think that that's appreciated by older generations. I don't know. Tell me what you found.
I don't think you beat Nick Fuentes by slamming your hand on the table or slamming your fist on the table and clutching your pearls and screeching about how egregious the things he says are. Everybody knows how egregious the things he says are. And that was what came away when we went out in the wild and talked to people about Fuentes, talked to Zoomers about Fuentes. I do think it's worth a reminder. I mean, I think a lot of people, rightfully and reasonably so, read this focus group that we put out in City Journal and were deeply alarmed about things that Gen Z Republicans had to say about not just Nick Fuentes, but about Adolf Hitler. But it is worth reminding that no one is making you answer every question in a focus group. It is sort of an open-ended discussion. And those who have hot takes are sort of the ones most likely to raise their hands and offer said hot takes. If you have kind of a normal run-of-the-mill view on something, you may just stay quiet because that is so, normal. But yeah, I mean, look, like you said, about half of the group knew who Fuentes was. I think some maybe developed a greater familiarity with him or what he was or represented after others spoke about him. Only 1 out of 20 was someone who could be reasonably classified as a griper or a Fuentes follower and endorsee. He was the only 1 out of 20 who, for example, subscribed to the idea earnestly that women should not be allowed to vote in the United States of America. But as for the others, I mean, there were others who said positive things about Fuentes. Almost all of them, other than that one griper, cited his humorous nature. And a lot of them also just perceived him as anti-woke almost in some sense. A lot of these people aren't paying attention to a ton of nuance with respect to why Nick Fuentes is 10 times more controversial than, say, even Ben Shapiro. And I think that is, at least in part, because of the fact that this is a generation of people who barely remember a politics pre-Trump. They were kids during the most of the Obama years, and most of them weren't politically conscious for that period of time. And so their political reality is identified by a world in which everybody nominally right of center has always been classified by mainstream public opinion as an unrepentant racist. They said it about John McCain. They said it about Mitt Romney. They said it about Donald Trump. They even said it about Ben Shapiro. So when they hear it now, today, about Tucker Carlson, or they hear it about Nick Fuentes, they're less likely to react. I think it's a little bit different when they see some of the jarring stuff that Fuentes says on camera. They recoil a little bit more when you give them a specific quote, but they're very quick to say just how liberals did for a generation when they, didn't want to have their feet held to the fire about something Jon Stewart might say. They react similarly and say, well, Fuentes he's just joking there. He's not serious. Now, I, Jesse Arm from the Manhattan Institute, don't want to do anything that would potentially equivocate or compare Nick Fuentes to Jon Stewart. I don't think they are, quote unquote, similarly normal figures in our politics. Absolutely not. But I'm just telling you that was sort of the aura I picked up, or the air I picked up from the room with these young conservatives in the Nashville area.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, that part of it, whether I disagree on the details or not, I get where it's coming from because, a lot of these kids, they were kids, they came up in the awakening, after 2015 and like say before 2021 or so. And there were a lot of people canceled then where it was just, trivial. It was like, whatever. It was someone misspeaking or they purposely misconstrued what they said. It was just BS, like the things people were canceled for, they lost their jobs for were crazy. Okay. And so I think when it's a situation when people are like, oh, this person problematic because, they didn't read the room and all this stuff, eventually people just, I think, have thrown their hands up. And I think it's really hard. And you see this with Megyn Kelly doesn't want to cancel Candace Owens, and whether you think that's right or wrong, I think the instinct is just no, we've seen this before and we don't want to do this again. And I think, maybe it's overreach, maybe it's overreacting, but I can see where the impulse is coming from. What do you think about that?
I think that's generally right. I think that where someone like Megyn Kelly perhaps makes mistakes, and who am I? I'm not, a media influencer with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers like these people that we're discussing. But I do think where Megyn Kelly maybe makes some degree of a mistake is that actually one thing that people in the room kind of credited Tucker Carlson for and said they liked about Tucker Carlson was his ability or his willingness post Fox News to just be paradigm breaking, to be somebody who's not, you don't always know what they're going to say. So with somebody like Megyn Kelly, it maybe feels like on the one hand, okay, so she has no hesitations about punching what she now perceives as left all of the time, but she doesn't punch right. Well, that's actually a relatively familiar dynamic for a lot of these people. Whereas with Fuentes, you never know where he's going to land. On the Venezuela question, just in the last 24 hours, there was a sort of an odd silence from a lot of people in what could ostensibly be called the Groyper community who didn't know what to say or where to go. And even Fuentes himself was kind of changing his message and reaction to what had happened as facts on the ground were emerging. You've seen similar maneuvers from Fuentes, right? Like when he's pulled back from the Charlie Kirk assassination conspiracizing, right? Where he says, this stuff from Candace Owens is just absurd, beyond the pale, and I want no part of it. That was, I think, actually the time at which Tucker Carlson basically came to the conclusion, some people have told me, with closeness to the matter, that was when Carlson decided he had to have Fuentes on, because it was sort of such a rhetorically savvy maneuver, because Carlson himself, despite being a close colleague of Kirk's and of TPUSA, was one of those people engaging in some of that kind of conspiratorial thinking and public speaking around Kirk's death. So I think Fuentes has a savviness to him. It's inconsistent. I mean, one time, Fuentes actually liked a tweet that I put out, talking about how you can't really have a functional political coalition of conspiracy-minded schizophrenics, paranoid schizophrenics, essentially, because paranoid schizophrenics don't have a coherent political ideology between them. So you can't organize a coalition around it. But I guess where I think Fuentes misses the mark, and why I don't think he should be liking my tweets about that kind of thing, is because I would categorize him as part of that group. But at least he does not conceive himself as part of that group, and he sees himself as different than a Candace Owens or a Milo Yiannopoulos or even a Tucker Carlson, I think.
Well, I mean, one thing I'll say about Fuentes is, I have not watched. I watched some of the stuff, but like he produces so much content. There's so much to say, so many things he's said. He seems very inconsistent from, day to day, week to week. And, the unevenness of it is kind of the entertainment, I think, in some ways, because, you don't always know. I mean, back in the 1990s, it was Rush Limbaugh, Ditto Heads, and then grandparents that are watching Fox News, and now it's like the MAGA influencers, and these are people, I don't know, like Benny Johnson, give a name, whatever Trump does is good. Like if Trump does A, and then he switches to the opposite of A without skipping a beat, they'll explain how it's good. And even if you are a supporter of Donald Trump and you are on the right, I mean, that's just not entertaining. Like, exactly what's going, you don't need to pay attention. You know exactly that they're going to give the talking points to support whatever Trump wants. Fuentes is mostly, I think, like aligned with a lot of Trump's positions, but he will, throw some punches here and there out of the box, and that's entertaining. And I think that's actually, you're a little younger than me, but like the New Republic back in the day, it was liberal, but it was heterodox in some ways, and that was kind of the reason it was a big deal, because if you wanted to just read, The Nation or The Progressive, they would just, I mean, it's not totally fair because they're not like, totally like party organs, but you know what I'm saying? Like maybe Center for American Progress. Like, that whatever the Democratic Party is doing, they're going to be behind it. They'll figure out a way to be behind it. Whereas like the New Republic, maybe would like dissent on some things, and like that makes you think. Obviously, I don't think Nick Fuentes is the New Republic, but for 2026, as we're recording, this is how people consume a lot of politics news now, right?
I think that the most interesting piece of all of this is just that the audience reacts in real time so much quicker today because of social media and these distributed followings across various social platforms. So the types of institutions like you were just describing, whether they're ideological magazines like the New Republic, or they're think tanks like the Center for American Progress or the Heritage Foundation, which has been a subject of significant controversy in recent weeks, surrounding some of these figures and issues that we're talking about right now. The reason why you're seeing some of these turbulent waters with these players is because a generation ago, those institutions would have been ideologically anchored. And insofar as they embrace some degree of heterodoxy or path breaking where they're willing to punch back at their own elected officials, it would be rooted in a sort of an ideological vision of the world that they felt was even more coherent than what the political players were shape-shifting for at the behest of other kind of coalitional interests or what have you. So Fuentes is there's this game with Fuentes type influencers online where they're always trying to suss out what their audience wants from them or how they can keep things interesting or how they can pull themselves back. It's very tabloidy. It's like, how am I going to sell papers? I'm going to sell papers by saying something, whether it's true or not, that's salacious and substantially different than what everybody else is saying. I've kind of called this National Enquirer conservatism. I've said, I'm not necessarily I've said that national conservatism is more preferable than this National Enquirer conservatism, which is just figuring out what sells, what's chaotic, what's noisy, and what's different than what all of the other influencers are saying right now. And you're right, that is different than what a Benny Johnson has on offer, who is just going to be boosting what the president is doing all of the time. But it is worth saying, I think, to some extent, Donald Trump's success as a political and media phenomenon has been because he has a little bit of that unpredictability baked into the cake with what he offers. With him, I think he actually deserves more credit as a serious operator within the system as it exists, and someone who's brought some policy pragmatism to the Republican Party around, say, like the abortion issue in the lead up to the 2024 election, where Trump's RNC locked everybody's phones up and said, hey, we're going to rewrite the party platform and we're going to be way harsher on our language about like critical race theory and DEI and immigration, but we're going to delete the language about gay marriage and we're going to revise the language about abortion. Like that, to some extent, is an interesting policy pragmatism that I think there's a very strong case to say that it won more votes. But what has devolved out of that in the social media dominated influencer environment, where the incentives of creators are vastly different than those of politicians who actually have to get elected and go turn out voters in a caucus in Iowa with people who are registered with the GOP. I think that the difference is just a much greater willingness to adopt the conspiratorial incoherent stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of like their, stated policies, they're not nearly as radical as, I mean, I don't know, I'm friends with Rod Dreher, and, some of the listeners might know, he talked about how, like, a third of staffers, on the Hill that a Republican might be groypers. That seems like an exaggeration, but, there's something there. On the other hand, a lot of these, Zoomers, pretty normal on most things. Although, like, I guess like they're moving past boomer conservatism on Israel and a few other issues, right? Like, I mean, tell me your take, like, to that.
I think that I think Zoomer conservatives are often more liberal than the rest of the Republican Party. I said that weirdly. I think the youngest conservatives or the youngest Republicans are often more liberal than the older factions of their party. Today, there's this weird thing happening where we've somehow convinced ourselves, because of corners of the internet that seem to enjoy the based meme or whatever, that in fact the Gen Z contingent of the GOP is much more right-wing than the rest of the party. But it's just not accurate. Like, we did some polling at the Manhattan Institute that predated this focus group with the Gen Z conservatives, and found that new entrant Republicans, essentially people who don't have a long history of voting Republicans, people who are new to the party in these last couple cycles voting for Donald Trump, they're more likely to have voted for Democrats in the past. They hold much more liberal views across the board. When I talked, and then going back to this focus group, right? When I talked to some of these people in this room, I asked them about abortion. Again, this is a very Christian room of all self-IDing Republicans. For the most part, all of them voted for Trump. And they're not one of them was willing to articulate the maximalist pro-life position. That's interesting. So I guess it would, so sure, they haven't adopted the boomer position on Israel, you could say, but they haven't adopted the boomer conservative position on abortion either, or they haven't adopted the boomer conservative position on economics wholesale. They're much more open to economically left-leaning, typically associated, at least that's how we would historically categorize it, ideas about how the economy should work. So there's some evidence that this contingent may be more open to influencers and podcasters who are willing to say outlandish things about various various different ethnic groups, but I'm not seeing a lot of evidence that suggests they are more ideologically right-wing on any issue, economic, foreign policy, or social and cultural. And that extends, by the way, even to according to our polling, when you compare the core Republican group of people who have been voting GOP for a long time to this new entrant group that is younger and more diverse, that new entrant group is also much more liberal on stuff like DEI and transgender, too. So it's not just the legacy social issues. They're just more liberal, even if there's a meme-driven sort of astroturfed campaign to convince these people or convince us that these people are somehow more right-wing.
Do you think that perception is just who's loud online, right? It's it's an unrepresentative clamoring, whereas you're just when you just go out into the broader population. Concrete about it, what was it, last December? No, December before, 2024, Vivek Ramaswamy said something about H-1Bs and American students, and the anti-Indian stuff happened. And it's crazy online, it's just crazy. I'm on Twitter and I'm brown, so I'm telling you, there's a lot of Jeet replies, it's just I just expect it now. But a lot of Indian people, Indian Americans, journalists, they reach out to me and they're like, where is this coming from? Because I don't see this in the real world.
Look, the latest thing from the Groyper crowd online is an explicit stated preference for Gavin Newsom to be elected in 2028 over J.D. Vance. So I'm not sure that even online that you could make the case that they're more right wing than, say, the median boomer conservative who watches Fox News and shows up to vote in presidential primary elections. So I guess color me unconvinced. I don't think this is so historically atypical than, say, in the early 2000s when young Republicans were organizing and making the case for gay marriage to older figures in their party. It's got a different kind of veneer on it now, and it's got a different shape. But fundamentally, I think we're still seeing the same phenomenon play out, where you've just got a younger contingent within the GOP that doesn't vote as much or as frequently, that is more liberal on certain policy questions, but for the fact that, they're more racist. But also the notion that people who are more racist are going to be more likely to be supportive of DEI doesn't actually surprise me.
Yeah, it sounds just from the way you're describing it and some of your findings, it just sounds like these are people that were brain rotted or irony pilled or red pilled or whatever by the woke stuff. And so, they like to say racist things because they're so over all of the earnest, social progressivism that was in the schools, that was in college, that was in the media, it was, I think they called it the blue blob. Back in the day, Leighton Woodhouse, a friend of mine, it's just a huge institutional pushes for this sort of stuff. So even if, I don't think that they're actually racist. I think They like to say racist things. There are, boomer conservatives who, live in gated communities and they want good schools. I mean, boomers use code words, whereas, and they would never say it, but you know what they really mean. Whereas it sounds like some of these Zoomers are just like, they're ripping the mask off and they're just like, yeah, whatever. you know, we just like to say these words because, we were policed. We were policed and like, we don't want to be policed anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really clear and effective articulation of what is going on. Yeah, these people live in 2025. I was going to say 2025, 2026 America.
Yeah.
They are having their packages delivered. They are having their food served. They are dealing with doctors and lawyers who are Black, Hispanic, Indian, gay, Jewish, whatever. They're dealing with these people in day-to-day life. And I don't think these are, they're throwing on Klan hoods at night and riding around or really want to live in a segregated America. It's like an outrage-driven online phenomenon. There's a guy running for governor of Florida who I'm almost like hesitant to even bring more attention to because he's polling in the low single digits, and yet he has hundreds of thousands of followers on the internet. Somebody, should investigate how, that degree of separation there, or why that may be happening, or if there are bot networks, domestic, foreign, or otherwise, that may be helping to prop up somebody like that, but who is sort of anchoring his whole campaign in calling the Trump-endorsed frontrunner ethnic slurs. He's every tweet is just Byron Donalds, who is the African-American leading contender to be the next governor of Florida and has the Trump endorsement. Someone who is a slave to corporate interests, is a slave to the establishment GOP, is a slave. He represents, in all caps, a dark vision for Florida. He's a dark figure. In the latest video, I think that I saw him post, the song by, I think, I don't know who sings it, some rapper. The song is just called My N-Word, plays in the background as he's speaking about Byron Donalds, his opponent for this office. So it's like one wonders how serious all this is. I actually happen to that guy's got a long history. He's been in politics for a while. He didn't used to subscribe to any of these views or this brand. His name is James Fishback. And I think the receipts of all of that will come out in the weeks to come. But yeah, it's a strange phenomenon. I think it is just I think you hit the nail on the head when you kind of described this as a desire to just say anything that comes to your mind. I mean, one of the smartest Democratic pollsters that I talk to on a regular basis told me in earnest, shortly following President Trump's reelection in November of last year, or in November of 2024, he said, I really think Trump got reelected because young men really, really, really want to be allowed to say gay and retarded again.
Yeah. It's allowed. It's allowed now. I mean, these do seem trivialities, but there are some real issues that they have, and so I think, like you said, healthcare, health insurance. So back in my day, when a lot of 20-somethings didn't have health insurance because they were healthy and they didn't want it, and now I think like there's a mandate, and I've been with like mostly employer-based like health insurance my adult life, so I don't know all the details of how the marketplace works, not gonna lie. What was their issues with healthcare and health insurance? Like, why did that come up a lot?
Yeah, I was really surprised by that because young people are, by and large, healthy. I think we really raised it because we wanted to dig into where these economic concerns are rooted from a policy standpoint, right? Because we're hearing a lot of complaints about the economy not working for them. We also asked about, do these people own stocks? A lot of them, you know, didn't realize they own stocks. Said they don't, but that they have a 401k or something like that. But yeah, this healthcare thing kind of came up somewhat without prompting, if I recall correctly, because I think that for those who didn't have steady employment, especially, there was just this deep-seated fear of like, healthcare is so expensive and I have no plan if I were to get sick. I just don't. So it's a fear, I think,
Hmm.
more than a necessarily like a lived terror. There's just this behemoth of a system that they don't understand, and that they sort of live in perpetual fear of navigating. But for those who have, again, I mean, I don't want to over extrapolate from it, because for those who did have steady employment from reliable, you know, private sector operators, or I guess public sector, there was no great deal of concern about what might happen if they got sick. But for those who didn't, it was like a real black box that they were almost petrified to even begin thinking about.
Okay. So just a couple of other issues. It seems on immigration, the focus group was not. I don't know. Like they did a survey of TPUSA attendees, and the majority of attendees wanted a moratorium, which means like no legal as well, like or maybe net zero. Let's put it that way. But like these focus group people were not. They were focused on illegal immigration, just like boomer cons. Just like older conservatives have been for a generation.
I find that I read a lot of polling about immigration. I find that with polling that separates out illegal immigration from legal immigration, you tend to get the Trump position reflected by American Republicans, meaning they are essentially for high-skilled, capable, legal immigrants, people who are going to come here and speak English, not become a public charge, be reliant on welfare or what have you, people who are going to come with a little bit of money in their pocket and potentially even hire Americans for new jobs. Generally, you find that Americans at large and even Republicans are supportive of that. Uh, but on illegal immigration, there is a maximalist deportation view. There were some people, even in our focus group, who expressed some caution or pessimism about the way ICE was carrying out deportations today. But the through line with the majority of the group was that this is wrong, this is deeply unfair, and something needs to be done about it. But yeah, I'm like you said, Razib, I'm not sensing or forget sensing. I'm not seeing in polling data a ton of evidence to support a total moratorium on immigration of any kind in surveys where illegal and legal immigration are separated out from each other in the question. And yeah, as far as that like Turning Point USA exit poll goes, um, obviously that's a pretty unique group. Young people who are going to fly across the country to attend a Turning Point USA conference. And also, I'll say that was a survey that I don't believe separated out significantly the legal from illegal immigration, separate batteries. For the most part, that survey struck me as one that Turning Point wanted to be able to. One that Turning Point probably would have been able to confidently predict what it would have said before they shared it with their conference goers, and one where they would have been comfortable with the results that they saw.
Well, I mean, on foreign policy, there does seem to be a bit of a shift, though, right? Away from, just internationalism, neoconservatism, whatever you want to say. Americans on the right and the left seem kind of exhausted, a lot of us, because the last generation, since 9/11, with the war on terror, involvement in Afghanistan, Iraq. As we're recording, there's something going on in Venezuela. But I don't see, left and right. I don't see like broad popular support for that sort of thing anymore, but it seems like, our politicians have different things in mind. What do you say to that?
Skeptical. I think that the American people, by the way, all of the polling I've seen of the Republican electorate by and large remains very hawkish. Even on Israel, the Ukraine numbers are complicated depending about whether you ask about money for Ukraine or weapons for Ukraine. But yeah, there's definitely, I mean, even in our focus group with these young conservatives, like one of the young guys who was like going on to work in finance next year, who was, one of the few to said extensively positive things about Israel, even called, when we asked him what he thought about Ukraine, he called it a scam or something like that. So acknowledging there's a caveat there. I think Americans and Republicans have no appetite for long, protracted military engagements where the U.S. is expected to play a role, either with boots on the ground where there's no appetite, or with even financial resources stretched over a long, ongoing horizon. But I'm not sensing significant pushback on the kinds of stuff in Venezuela that was like accomplished yesterday, or even the B-2 bombing campaign to take out the Iranian nuclear facilities. That to me feels much more astroturfed, manufactured by, influencers who are kind of, who knows, maybe connected to Qatar or whatever. But practically speaking, no, I think that the Trump doctrine when he leaves office will not be one of retreat or anything that could conceivably be called isolationist or taking a step back from the world stage, but it will be one of something a lot more Jacksonian in kind of the foreign policy quadrants, as Walter Russell Mead has broken them out over the years. No, it's this idea that like, if we're going to do something, it's going to be swift, it's going to be quick, it's going to be expertly done, and it's going to be very, very, very painful for our enemies. And look, I mean, even in the Bush years, I don't think like those who were, I'm doing air quotes here, I think this is audio only, like the greatest neocons among that generation. There was not a ton of appetite to go make some of these like aggressive maneuvers in Latin America, like now appears to be the Trump Rubio doctrine. So yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical of a hard turn toward isolationism that exists in our politics. We'll see. Maybe that will change if we've got a 2028 election between a JD Vance and an AOC or something like that. But until then, I don't buy it.
Okay. I guess, I mean, I think you kind of already alluded a little bit to this, but like, what was the biggest surprise for you coming out of the focus group? Like, in terms of like what shook your priors the most?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, I think the biggest thing that stuck with me was that for many of these Zoomers, their lives are not especially bad, right? You had some who referenced family wealth or trust funds, and others who I think actually a majority told us that they felt they would be upwardly mobile, that they felt that they would be economically better off than their parents are. And I think coloring that, or sort of hiding in the background of all of the stuff we're talking about with the Zoomers and whether or not they're substantially politically different from the Boomers in a way that will be long lasting and that they won't come home as some previous generations have within the GOP to more traditional conservative views. There is looming intergenerational wealth transfer that is going to come from Boomers when they start dying to millennials and Zoomers. And it's going to be one of the biggest in American history from one generation to another. And a lot of them are going to be the beneficiaries of it. And then there'll be another slice of them who are not. And they're going to want a slice of that pie. And they may embrace an even more aggressive, more radical kind of AOC style dogma in order to get a slice of that massive intergenerational transfer of wealth. But I think that hiding in the background is sort of what animated this fact that a lot of these people didn't, despite when you ask them saying, oh yeah, things are going somewhat poorly, although even there
It's vibes. It's vibes.
It's vibes. It's the vibes based view of everything. Despite the fact that a lot of them just weren't dealing with extensively hard circumstances. And this was a random pool of Gen Z conservatives.
Okay. Yeah, this is, this last thing I want to ask you about here. And this is kind of like a little bit off topic, but one thing I've noticed with some of my Zoomer friends, just young men in their 20s, let's say, I'll see memes on Twitter, social media, and they start repeating the memes. And then when I talk to them about it, it's not like they read an article or watched a news report. It's just a meme, and they repeat it like they believe it. But they clearly haven't thought too deeply. And so, I just wonder if some of the disconnect between when you probe them, what they really think and who they are, versus some of the stuff that they're spitting out on socials or on their TikToks, is just like kind of like the meme machine, just getting into their brains and they just regurgitate. But it's not always based on experience. It's maybe they're being manipulated. I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So when we ask these kids about like where they get their news, I don't think a single one of them referenced a written publication. Not one. I think we got very little even in the way of like television news. It's all personality and meme driven.
Yeah.
Okay. So when, I work at a stodgy old traditional think tank like the Manhattan Institute. I talk to a lot of people who work at, those kinds of like traditional legacy, conservative or otherwise institutions. And they ask me about like, how can we reach Gen Z? And I said, like, don't expect anyone to read anything. Don't expect anyone to even watch a full podcast appearance.
Yes.
You gotta be clipping. You gotta be editing. You gotta be memeing. And that's not what a lot of these people want to hear, because it's not sort of what they're used to, and it's not necessarily a positive piece of commentary about what the future entails for Gen Z. But look, you hear a lot about income inequality with future generations, maybe brought on by AI, but information inequality is just going to be like a far even more egregious phenomenon and split. I think like the wealthy half of this country is going to read, and the bottom half won't really need to, because the video first content for everything that they need to consume. And that's why I think that some of these new media personality driven players are punching so far above their weight right now. It's because like the shifts in the environment lend themselves very well to those types of figures who have already been operating this way for a while. So let's wait and see. The winds are kind of shifting. AI is now available to everybody. Institutions are now, some of them being taken over by the new media types of the recent past. In the case of like CBS falling into the hands of Barry Weiss now. So we'll see. Maybe the center can reassert itself yet in some meaningful ways. Look, I mean, you just talked to me about the Venezuela thing, right? And there was this feeling that was palpable over the course of the last few weeks that like the young new left and the young new right were both moving well into the direction of isolationism, and that this meme-driven discourse going to push them there. But I don't know. I've seen a lot of crazy Maduro memes in the last like 48 hours. And a lot of content that seems to be driving young people to be more supportive of actions like that than less. So we'll see. The meme wars are coming, and believe it or not, it will have a monumental impact on our culture and our politics.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're saying here is the memes cut both ways, you know? It's, if they're, I mean, it seems like they're a little bit fickle sometimes, and you can just kind of push them, which, okay, to be fair, boomers that are watching MSNBC and Fox News, how different are they, so, I mean, it's not, Zoomers are not a different species. They're just like, previous generation, but they're, raised in this time with social media, decline of, mainstream television, broadcasting TV. And, I think we're just going to have to deal with it. And, I really appreciate you kind of digging deep, kind of exposing, kind of like the tendrils of like, where the causality, like where these ideas are coming from, and all of some of our perceptions, some of our stereotypes seem not totally correct, right? And so really appreciate it, even though, they're not going to read your pieces in City Journal. So you can say whatever you want to say, or you can write
Yeah.
whatever you want
I
to
was
write,
actually
right?
wondering that. I wonder if any of these people will find this and realize that their words were, shared with the country. But I because they don't read print publications, let alone small policy focused ones, I sort of doubt they will. But time will tell. Yeah, we'll keep exploring this. I mean, there are interesting other subpopulations that we want to drill down and figure out what's going on. I mean, I'm fascinating by the ways the Democratic Party are changing right now. We talked about Gavin Newsom a little bit. We talked about AOC and Jon Stewart and Mark Cuban and some of these other kind of like left-coded figures in the country. And I want to do a lot more polling and focus grouping to also dig into some of these changes that are happening on the American left, because the Democratic Party has no idea what it wants to be or what it will put on offer in 2028. And unless they want shellacking from, some Marco Rubio, JD Vance super ticket that's like predestined and endorsed by the president on day one. No idea whether that will happen or if that will happen, but it's certainly one possibility. And yeah, the Democratic Party as it unravels, I think we at the Manhattan Institute are going to be taking a good, earnest look under the hood to try and understand a little bit of what's animating voters on that side of the spectrum as well.
Okay. Well, it was great catching up with you, man. I really appreciate, in your own words, because I've seen it on the socials being talked about. But I hope the Zoomers that listen, and some of you guys do listen, I hope you appreciated these insights on your own, fellow Zoomers. I don't know. I have to say, I have done surveys. The people who read the essays, as I've said, tend to be boomers. And I love you guys. You're retired, you're doing stuff, you're reading. And then, younger millennials and Zoomers, like they're definitely skewed towards listening to my podcast. And I should probably I should do some various things. But you know what? I'm crotchety, I'm old now, and, no. Maybe someday. But like, things come and go. Who knows what the latest technology will be in the next couple of years. This is, we didn't explore it in detail, but this is like technology intersecting with policy, sociology, all these things. And I think that's what you're getting at. It's not just like plain old politics. It's like how social media and technology is transforming our perception of the world and how we perceive the world, right?
Yeah, I think TV still matters too, insofar as like TV is a eminently clippable medium, and it's like well produced and ready to go in a way that a lot of podcasts aren't yet. And you're seeing a lot of stuff like come off of the CNN Abby Phillip roundtable debates or whatever, and then motivating another day of discourse on X as a result. So these mediums will certainly feed off of each other. And yes, Razib, you should clip your stuff so that the attention, deficit disorder rattled young people can consume some of it in other mediums as well, because not all of them have, the ability to sit through a 1 hour long podcast, but hopefully they will for this one. And thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, no, appreciate it, man. Okay. I will see you around online as usual.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
This podcast for kids.